I won't pretend this is something easy to explain. Some things enter your life quietly. They don't arrive with warnings, signs, or moments that clearly announce their importance. They don't come with a reason that immediately makes sense. They simply appear, and somehow, without realizing it, they begin changing the way you see everything around you. That's what happened here. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that I didn't notice the shift until I was already standing somewhere different. I've always believed that people reveal themselves through time, that understanding someone is something built through countless moments, conversations, experiences, and memories. That real connection is something earned through consistency, not something discovered overnight. And maybe that's why this feels unusual. Because with you, it didn't feel like discovering someone new. It felt like recognizing something familiar. And that difference matters. There's a strange feeling that comes when someone understands the things you never explain. Not because they somehow know every detail of your life, but because they notice the parts most people overlook, the pauses, the changes in tone, the moments when words don't match what someone is actually feeling. Most people listen to respond, you listen to understand, and is a world of difference between those two things. For a long time, I thought being understood was something people asked for, but rarely truly wanted. Because being understood means being seen beyond the version you carefully present. It means someone notices the things you hide, the doubts behind confidence, the tiredness behind silence, the thoughts behind simple words. And being seen like that can feel uncomfortable because distance is easy. Distance gives you control. You decide what people know. You decide what they see. You decide how close they are allowed to come. That control becomes a habit, a way of protecting the parts of yourself that you don't trust everyone to handle. I became good at that, good at keeping certain doors closed, good at creating a version of myself that people could understand without ever truly reaching the deeper parts. Not because I wanted to deceive anyone, but because not everyone knows what to do with something real. Some people see depth and immediately try to simplify it. They try to explain it, label it, reduce it into something that makes sense to them. But you didn't do that. You didn't try to solve me. You didn't approach me like I was a mystery that needed to be figured out. You just accepted that there were things about me that existed beyond explanation, and somehow that made me want to explain more. That's the strange part. The people who push hardest to get close are often the ones who make you want to step away. But the person who gives you space, the person who doesn't demand access, that person somehow becomes the one you naturally move closer to, because there is safety in not being forced. There is comfort in knowing someone is there without needing to take anything from you. And that's what I noticed. You never tried to take a place in my life. You simply became someone whose presence had a place. There is a difference. A person can demand attention. A person can ask for importance. But becoming important happens differently. It happens through moments that seem small at first. A conversation you remember, a feeling you recognize, a silence that doesn't feel uncomfortable. A simple message that changes your entire mood without even trying. Those are the moments nobody plans. They just happen. And somehow, those are the moments that stay. I started noticing that I didn't have to prepare myself around you. I didn't have to choose every word carefully. I didn't have to create the perfect version of myself. I could simply exist. And that is rare. Because most connections require performance. People show their best sides. They hide their confusion. They hide their fears. They hide the parts they think might make someone leave. But with you, something felt different. It felt like I didn't need to prove that I was worth understanding. I didn't need to convince you that there was more beneath the surface. You already looked deeper, not because you were searching, because you were paying attention. And attention is one of the rarest forms of care. Anyone can say beautiful words, anyone can make promises, anyone can create a temporary feeling. But noticing someone, truly noticing them, that requires presence. And your presence felt different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding. It didn't try to become the center of everything. It simply existed. And somehow, that made it impossible to ignore. I began realizing that some people don't enter your life by changing everything around you. They enter by changing the way you experience what was already there. The same days feel different. The same conversations feel different. The same silence feels different. Not because the world changed, because your perspective did. And that's what scared me. Not you, the effect. Because I've always been someone who understands my own mind. I know how I think. I know how I process things. I know how to separate temporary feelings from things that actually matter. But this didn't feel temporary. It didn't feel like a passing emotion. It felt like something deeper, something quieter, something that didn't need constant attention to exist. And maybe that was the most surprising part. The strongest things are not always the loudest. Sometimes the things that affect you most are the things that barely make a sound. A thought, a memory, a person, a presence. Something that slowly becomes part of your everyday awareness before you even realize it happened. And one day you look back and think, when did this become important? When did this person become someone I consider before making decisions? When did their words start carrying a different weight? When did their absence become something I actually notice? I don't have an exact answer. There wasn't one specific moment, no single event, no dramatic turning point. It was a collection of small things, 1,000 quiet moments, creating something bigger than any one moment could explain. And maybe that's why it feels real, because things that are forced usually announce themselves. Things that are natural simply grow. And this grew without pressure, without planning, without either of us trying to make it something. It just became something. And now I find myself standing in front of a question I never expected to ask. What do you do when someone becomes important without asking for permission? What do you do when someone becomes important without asking for permission? That question has stayed with me because I've always believed that everything meaningful should have a clear beginning. A reason, a moment where you can look back and say, this is where it changed. But some things don't work like that. Some connections don't arrive as a single moment. They arrive as a series of moments that quietly build something before you even realize there is something being built. And maybe that's what makes them so difficult to understand, because the mind likes certainty, it likes definitions, it likes knowing where something starts and where it ends, but not everything meaningful can be placed inside simple boundaries. Some people become important in ways that don't follow the rules you created for yourself. They don't enter through the doors you opened. They don't wait for an invitation. They simply become part of the landscape of your thoughts. And suddenly you realize you're not looking at your life the same way anymore. That realization is strange. because I've always been careful about what I allow to affect me. I don't easily change my opinions. I don't easily change my habits. I don't easily allow people to influence the way I see things, not because I don't value others, but because I've spent a long time building my own understanding of the world. I've learned how to stand on my own, how to carry my own thoughts, how to handle my own storms without needing someone else to calm them. And then someone appears who doesn't try to save you, doesn't try to fix you, doesn't try to become the answer to everything. They simply stand beside you. And somehow that changes everything because there is a huge difference between someone who wants to complete you and someone who makes you realize you were already complete. The first creates dependence. The second creates recognition. And what I felt with you was recognition. Like something inside me became clearer because it had finally been reflected back, not copied, not replaced, reflected. There are parts of ourselves we don't always see until someone else notices them. The kindness we underestimate, the strength we ignore, the emotions we hide, the thoughts we never say because we assume nobody would understand them, and then someone comes along who notices those things naturally, not because they are trying to impress you, not because they are trying to gain something from you, but because that is simply how they see, and that kind of understanding is difficult to forget, because once you experience being seen without having to explain yourself, ordinary interactions start feeling different, not worse, just different. You begin noticing the difference between someone hearing your words and someone understanding the meaning behind them, between someone asking questions because they are curious and someone paying attention because they genuinely care, between someone wanting to know your story and someone wanting to understand the person living it. And that difference is everything. I think that's what changed something inside me. You didn't make me feel like I needed to become someone else. You made me feel like I could be more honest about who I already was. And honesty is not always comfortable. Sometimes honesty means facing parts of yourself you've avoided. Sometimes it means admitting that something matters when you were trying to convince yourself it didn't. Sometimes it means accepting that a person has reached a place in your life you never planned to give them. And that is where I found myself, trying to understand how someone could become significant without a single moment where I decided they would be, because usually I choose, I decide who gets close. I decide what I share. I decide what parts of myself remain private. But with you, it felt different. Not because boundaries disappeared, but because I didn't feel the need to constantly protect them. There was no feeling of being invaded, no feeling of losing myself. Instead, there was a strange feeling of being more myself, and that is something I never expected, because I always thought closeness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant risk. But maybe I was looking at it the wrong way. Maybe the right person doesn't make vulnerability feel like losing control. Maybe they make it feel like finally not having to hold everything alone. That doesn't mean suddenly everything becomes easy. It doesn't mean fears disappear. It doesn't mean uncertainty stops existing. It just means there is someone who makes the uncertainty feel less heavy. Someone whose presence doesn't remove the challenges of life, but changes the way you carry them. And that is a powerful thing because people often underestimate the impact of feeling understood. They think it's about words, about compliments, about constant reassurance, but sometimes the deepest understanding is silent. It's someone remembering something you mentioned weeks ago. It's someone noticing your mood before you explain it. It's someone knowing when to speak and when silence is the better response. It's someone who doesn't just react to what you show. They recognize what you don't. And I started realizing that maybe the reason this feels different is because it was never about being impressed. It was never about creating an image. It was never about pretending everything was perfect. It was about something much simpler, being real, and real things are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are quiet. Sometimes they are ordinary. Sometimes they are just two people existing honest in the same space. But somehow, those simple moments become the ones you remember most. The conversations that lasted longer than expected. The messages that arrived at the exact moment they were needed. The moments where you realized you were smiling without knowing why. Those things seem small from the outside, but from the inside, they become proof. Proof that something changed. Proof that someone became important. Proof that some connections cannot be measured only by time, because time creates familiarity, but understanding creates closeness. And sometimes understanding arrives before familiarity ever has the chance to form. That is what makes it confusing, because my mind says, take your time, analyze it, understand it, make sure it's real, but something deeper says, you already know, not everything meaningful needs to be studied before it can be felt. Not everything valuable needs to be explained before it can be appreciated. Some things simply exist, and the challenge is not discovering whether they are real. The challenge is accepting that they are. There comes a moment when you stop trying to understand why something feels different, and you simply accept that it does. I think that is the moment I reached. Not because every question disappeared. They didn't. I still wonder about the meaning of it all. I still think about where this connection is going, what it represents, and why something that began so quietly has managed to create such a strong presence. But I no longer question whether it exists, because some things don't need constant proof. They reveal themselves through consistency, through the way they remain, through the way they continue to matter even when nothing is happening. And that might be the most powerful part, the fact that this doesn't depend on constant attention. It doesn't need endless conversations to survive. It doesn't disappear when there is distance. It doesn't become meaningless when there is silence. It simply remains. And there is something rare about that. Most things in life require maintenance. They require effort, reminders, and constant energy, but some connections feel different. They feel like they have their own rhythm, like they exist naturally without needing to be forced into existence. And that kind of connection can be both comforting and frightening, because anything that reaches you deeply also has the ability to affect you deeply. That is the part people don't always talk about. They talk about the beauty of finding someone who understands you, but they don't talk about the responsibility that comes with being understood. Because once someone truly sees you, you can no longer pretend that you are invisible. You can no longer hide behind the version of yourself that you created for the world. You become aware, aware of what you feel, aware of what matters, aware of what you have been avoiding. And maybe that is what you did. You didn't change me. You made me notice parts of myself that were already there. Parts I had ignored because ignoring them was easier. It is easier to say you don't care than to admit something matters. It is easier to create distance than to admit someone's presence feels meaningful. It is easier to stay protected than to accept the possibility of being known. But protection has a cost. Sometimes the walls that keep people away also keep out the things we secretly hope to find. And I think that is the contradiction I have been trying to understand. I spent so much time learning how to protect my peace, how to remain unaffected, how to stay in control, and then someone came along who didn't take away my peace. They added something to it. That was unexpected, because I always thought the right person would feel like a disruption, like something that changes everything. But maybe the right person doesn't destroy your balance. Maybe they create a new balance, a different way of existing, a way where you are still yourself, but you are no longer carrying every thought alone, a way where your happiness doesn't depend on someone else, but their presence becomes something that adds meaning to your days. And that distinction matters, because real connection should never erase who you are. It should reveal more of who you are. That is what I feel here. Not that I became someone different, but that I became more honest with myself. I started paying attention to things I used to ignore, the moments I wanted to share, the thoughts I wanted to express, the feelings I tried to explain away. I realized that sometimes the heart understands something before the mind has finished creating reasons against it. And maybe that is why this has been difficult, because my mind wants structure, it wants a plan, it wants certainty, but this arrived without a map, without instructions, without guarantees, and maybe that is what makes it real, because the most meaningful things in life rarely come with guarantees. You don't know exactly how every story will end. You don't know every challenge you will face. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, but you recognize what is happening today. And today, I recognize this. I recognize that your presence has become something I value, not because I need it, because I appreciate it. There is a difference between needing someone because you cannot stand alone and choosing someone because life feels more meaningful when they are part of it. I don't want someone to complete my life. I want someone who can walk beside me while I continue building it. Someone who doesn't become my entire world, but someone who makes my world feel a little brighter. And that is what makes this connection feel different. It doesn't feel like losing myself in another person. It feels like finding a version of myself that I had forgotten existed. A version that is more open, more honest, more willing to accept that not everything has to be controlled. Because maybe control was never the same as peace. Maybe sometimes peace comes from allowing certain things to exist without constantly questioning them, allowing a conversation to happen, allowing a feeling to be acknowledged, allowing a person to matter. And I think that is what I am learning, that not every important thing arrives loudly. Some of the most important things arrive quietly and wait for you to notice, like a song you didn't expect to love, like a place that feels familiar even though you've never been there, like a person who somehow feels easier to understand than people you have known for years. That kind of connection is rare, not because it is perfect. Nothing is perfect, but because it feels honest. And honesty has a different kind of power. It doesn't need to convince. It doesn't need to perform. It simply exists. And maybe that is why I keep returning to the same thought. I didn't expect this. I didn't plan this. I didn't search for this. But somehow it found its way into my life. And now the only thing left is deciding what I do with something I never expected to find. because ignoring it would be pretending. And pretending has never been something I wanted from a meaningful connection. If something matters, it deserves honesty, it deserves respect, it deserves the courage to acknowledge it. And maybe that is where I am now, not trying to escape what I feel, not trying to exaggerate it, just accepting it for what it is, something unexpected, something rare, something that quietly became important before I realized it was happening. And maybe that is the most beautiful part. The things that truly matter are not always the things we choose. Sometimes they are the things that choose to stay. And maybe that is the truth I was avoiding all along. Not the existence of this connection, not the meaning behind it, but the fact that something could matter to me without me controlling how it happened, because control has always been my comfort, knowing where I stand, knowing what to expect, knowing how much of myself I am willing to reveal. Those things made life feel manageable. But then you appeared, and somehow the rules I had created for myself started feeling less important, not because they were wrong, because they were no longer necessary in the same way. I realized something. The strongest connections are not the ones where someone breaks through your walls. They are the ones where you slowly realize you don't need those walls anymore. There is a difference. Someone forcing their way into your life creates fear. Someone making you feel safe enough to open the door creates trust. And trust is not built through pressure. It is built through patience, through consistency, through small moments that quietly prove someone is not there to take from you. They are there to understand you. And that is what made this different. You never tried to convince me that you belonged in my life. You simply showed up in a way that made your presence feel natural. You didn't demand attention. You didn't ask for a place. You didn't try to become important. You became important because of who you were. And maybe that is the rarest thing about someone. Not what they promise, not what they say, but how they make you feel when nothing is being performed. Because anyone can be impressive for a moment. Anyone can say the right words. Anyone can create a temporary feeling. But consistency reveals everything. The way someone treats silence, the way someone handles your honesty, the way someone responds when there is nothing to gain, that is where the truth appears. And in those moments, I saw something different. I saw someone who didn't need me to be perfect, someone who didn't need me to always have the right answers, someone who didn't need me to hide the complicated parts of myself. And that gave me something I didn't realize I was missing, percention. Not permission from you, buffer centrin from myself, buffer centrin to, to stop pretending that I had everything figured out. Permission to admit that some people affect us, Batman censure to accept that being understood is not a weakness. For so long, I thought needing nothing from anyone was the strongest version of myself, but maybe strength is not about needing nothing. Maybe strength is knowing what matters and having the courage to value it, because caring about something always carries risk. When something matters, it can hurt. When someone matters, they can disappoint you. When you allow someone closer, you give them the ability to affect parts of you that most people never see. That is scary. But maybe everything meaningful has some level of risk. You cannot experience real connection while demanding complete protection. You cannot experience closeness while keeping every door locked. At some point, you have to decide whether protecting yourself from possible pain is worth missing possible meaning. And I think that is the choice I have been facing, Not whether this connection exists, but whether I am willing to accept what comes with it. Because the truth is, anything real asks something from you, not perfection, not sacrifice of who you are, but honesty, presence, the willingness to show up. And maybe that is what I want to do. Not because I am certain about every detail of the future, no one is. Not because I know exactly where this road leads, I don't. But because some things deserve a chance to exist. Some things deserve more than fear, more than overthinking, more than the instinct to run away before something can become important. And you have become one of those things, not because you changed everything, but because you reminded me that some things are worth allowing, were worth exploring, worth protecting. I think that is what makes this different from everything else. It does and feel like an escape from reality. It feels like a deeper understanding of reality. A reminder that behind all the noise, all the distractions, all the endless conversations people have without truly connecting, there are still moments where two people can genuinely recognize each other. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. And maybe that is enough. Maybe we don't always need to know the ending before appreciating the chapter we are living. Maybe we don't always need every answer before accepting that something has meaning. Maybe some connections are not meant to be immediately explained. Maybe they are meant to be experienced. And that is where I find myself now, not searching for a reason to deny it, not searching for a reason to exaggerate it, just acknowledging it. Acknowledging that somehow, in a world full of temporary conversations and passing faces, one person managed to become a place where my thoughts feel understood, a place where silence feels comfortable, a place where being myself feels easier. And that is not something I take lightly, because people come and go, moments come and go, years pass, things change. But sometimes, very rarely, something remains. Something leaves an imprint. Something becomes part of your story. And when you look back, you realize that certain people were not just moments in your life, they were turning points. They were reminders. They were proof that connection is still possible, that understanding still exists, that somewhere in the middle of all the uncertainty, two people can still find a reason to be present. And maybe that is what this is. Not a perfect answer, not a promise about tomorrow, just a real moment shared between two people who found something meaningful in each other. And sometimes that is more valuable than having every answer. Because the truth is, maybe don't know exactly what happens next. I don't know where this road leads, but I know one thing. Before you, I thought I understood myself completely. After you, I realized there were still parts of me waiting to be discovered. And maybe that is the greatest gift someone can give another person, not changing who they are, but helping them see themselves more clearly. And that is what you did. You didn't become my missing piece. You became the mirror that helped me recognize the pieces I already had. And once you see yourself more clearly, you can never return to pretending you don't. So whatever happens next, whatever direction life takes, whatever distance or challenges appear, AB will always know this. Somewhere along the way, someone entered my life quietly and somehow made everything feel a little more understood. And that is something I will never forget.